Welcome in. Real quick, before we get started, I got to give a plug, even though I ain't getting paid for it. But I just had a life-changing experience. If you're listening to this podcast going, well, how the hell did you have a life-changing experience on a football podcast in June? Well, there is a company called Nature's Bakery that makes gluten-free fig bars, and holy crap, best thing I ever put in my mouth. Phrasing. Anyway, welcome in. Who dat? God bless. Glad you're here. Hope you're having an amazing Thursday. It's how I know I'm getting old, man. I have a Fig Newton bar and wetting myself. Good Lord. Y'all remember when we started this show and I was in my 20s? I was young. I went out and did things. Now I'm over here just excited as heck over a new Fig Newton bar, which, by the way, why do Fig Newton bars have so many damn calories in them? Who dat to you, TJ, AJ Gaines, Bim, Matthew Penn, Jimbo, the Antonio. Don't be confused with anybody else. That's the Antonio 3321. Demetrius James, the Warrior. Any Forex traders here? What? No clue. This is I'm from the broke part of the town, which is every town. If there's a broke part in your town, that's me. That's where I'm from. I don't trade gold. If you want to give me some gold, I will then hoard it because I don't have enough money to trade anything. So if you give me the gold, I will then own gold, but I ain't trading it. It's mine now. I got gold. Alro, who dat to you? Welcome in. Tonight, we're going to have a serious / semi-serious conversation about why I believe that the New Orleans Saints have, if not the one of, most underrated tight end rooms in the NFL, particularly how I believe that they are going to have a phenomenal duo, assuming, of course, that that guy named Pete Carmichael can, put it together, actually figure out how to run an offense. Who knows? Who dat nation? Who knows? Mr. Jerry, good to see you. Joseph, good to see you. Demetrius, good to see you. Wasn't already in my 40s when you started the show. Demetrius, look, man, it's all good. It's just amazing how we age. I look at myself as we're streaming right now. I got a thinning hairline. I got a bougie Viking beard. I mean, wow, time changes. But what doesn't change is our love for the New Orleans Saints. That brings us together. And also the New Orleans Pelicans trying to get Scoot while not trading Zion. We're going to see how that goes. I will keep an eye on it during the show, but odds are nothing's going to happen until after the show, so no worries there. I even thought about doing a special pod, but we'll see. Which, by the way, for those that don't know, Scoot did go to Portland just because the Pels couldn't make a trade. So I don't think really anything exciting to be had. I mean, y'all can wait to pick 14 if you want to. But welcome in, everybody. I do think that what you have in Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson is unique in that I think that New Orleans can truly have a very dynamic duo, assuming the Saints decide to do more 12 personnel sets, which I think they should. I think they should do more 12 and 22 sets. I've talked about this for years as the league has changed in many ways. I feel like one thing that New Orleans needs to do is get ahead of the curve instead of being behind the curve. And that's actually one of the things that made Sean Payton so great during the prime New Orleans Saints years was he was ahead of the curve a lot of times. And if you go back to 2006, 2009, 2011, 2013, etc., go back to some of those years, and what you'll find is when New Orleans was running those offenses, and we talk about this, 2006, they went to the NFC Championship game. We often undersell that. And there's a lot of differences between today's New Orleans Saints or even the 2020 New Orleans Saints under Payton and what it was then. For example, even though that was a West Coast offense, it was very power running style, but they were trying to switch to a committee system and getting ahead of that game. And it was great to see and amazing to see, but at the same time, you had primo guys still in the league. I mean, Marshawn Lynch wasn't even a household name. I'm pretty sure Sean Alexander was still in the league then. You had, LaDainian Tomlinson still limping around. You had Adrian Peterson. You had some Clint Portis. You had some amazing names that were bell cows in that era. And New Orleans was going with a different approach. They were going with a committee approach. They were trying to spread things out, make it faster, and they were ahead of the curve. My hope is that New Orleans is the same thing here, where getting bigger is something that I've talked about for a couple years. You've noticed some really good teams do, and I think that you will see a return to not necessarily more power running style being required here, but more power football, more bell cows, more singular hits. And I'm not asking New Orleans Saints to change because you actually just got Kendra Miller, and I think that he could be a fantastic piece long term. But you also picked up Jamal Williams, who is a more natural fit for a bell cow style. Again, not trying to push AK out the window, but I am just trying to say I think New Orleans needs to work on being ahead of the curve instead of behind it. I think good offenses do that. And another aspect of that can be running an effective two tight end set that has traditional inline mechanics as well as attacking the seams. And what you notice when you study the NFL, and anybody who's been a fan for a long time has done in-depth study has noticed trends like this, but you will see that the NFL goes through stages and it constantly reinvents itself, but a lot of the reinventions are actually just going back to things that happened decades ago. For example, I just talked about the New Orleans using this West Coast offense with a committee system. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's not new. Actually, that was done in the 80s and that was done in the 90s. But things go out of style. And what out of style typically means in NFL lingo is it means that defenses have adapted and they are now taking away what was once a strength and making it a weakness. NFL does that all the time, and it's fantastic. We talked about, cover three match. Well, New Orleans ran cover three match right when Dennis Allen got here. Cover three match was actually created back in the late 90s and has gone through phases. Sometimes cover three match is in. Sometimes quarters is in. And right now, New Orleans is running a lot of quarters coverages. The last teams that most people relate to quarters coverages would be like the Ed Reeds and the Troy Polamalu's, elite safeties pulling off quarters. And you do need high-end safety play to typically pull off such coverages, which, by the way, Philly runs that as well. So when I look at New Orleans, I look at Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson, and by themselves, kind of unassuming, right? And I think a lot of this is when we think of tight ends around the league, most people think of just about two names, and that's it. Now Saints fans are going to list a couple of others because you've seen some in the division. But just out of curiosity for those live in chat, name your top 3 to 5 tight ends. Just hit me with them. And please don't feel bad if you can't name more than 3 good tight ends. This is not a shame thing. This is an example thing of this position is considerably neglected both from an analyst standpoint and I feel like even from a coaching standpoint, in that it hasn't been utilized a lot with the exception of Rob Gronkowski, right? Everybody knows Rob Gronkowski. He's retired now. Arguably not only the best tight end ever, he goes down as one of the greatest football players ever. But as a whole, we've got 3 or 4 people who've answered so far, and Jimbo lists Dallas Goedert as a top. But if you actually go, who was the top 5 receiving tight ends last year? So far, chat has listed 2 of them. They've listed Travis Kelce, who is literally the number 1 at any given time. And then one listed Mark Andrews. Now, somebody just listed George Kittle and then Evan Ingram. So a couple more got listed in that process. But of all those, we're talking about tight end. In the entirety of last year, there was 1 tight end who had over 1,000 yards receiving. No, Joseph, I was just talking about just who's in the league right now. There's 1 tight end that had 1,000 yards receiving last year, and that was Travis Kelce. And if you go down the list, there are actually, and this is a little bit mind-blowing, there are only 5 tight ends in the entire league last year who had 750 or more receiving yards. It'd be George Kittle, Evan Ingram, Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, yes, TJ Hawkinson, and Travis Kelce. And that's it. Now, that doesn't mean that there are other guys who aren't very good. Pat Freiermuth with Pittsburgh, I think, is a little bit of an underrated tight end. He was at 730 yards. You go down the list. Then Dallas Goedert, who somebody else brought up, 700 yards even, 3 tutties. Now, he was with Philly. So, they spread it out a little bit more there. And again, yards by themselves don't show. I'm just using this to prove a point. Whereas if you also go in terms of how many 1,000-yard receivers there were 21,000-yard receivers last year. And we were actually talking this last episode. Ain't no way everybody can name all them because I couldn't. So if I can't, damn it, I know you can. And if you can, you need to be doing the podcast, not me. So, it's a position where you can have success, where the numbers that we historically think of what makes a great guy at a position doesn't necessarily need to apply to that same degree. When we talk about Jimmy Graham and how amazing it was, being able to put off 1,000 yards and 10 plus TDs season after season made him unique, put him in a very rare air. But when I talk about the way that Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson together can be elite is look at what Foster Moreau did last year. 420 yards. By itself, not super impressive, right? Not bad at all, but still Nothing that like is mind blowing. But then look at Juwan Johnson, who had 508. And yet, if they work together, what they have is a tight end room that caught for right under 1,000 yards and right at 10 TDs. And this is actually where it really pops off and becomes an important argument for me. Because when I talk about the New Orleans Saints offense, we talk about Michael Thomas coming back. Can he be that successful elite receiver again? Who knows? Obviously, you want him to be. Well, you can't say with certainty that he will. Chris Olave, young up-and-coming guy, should have star potential. You obviously want to get targets that way. You definitely want to get targets Alvin Kamara's way. So you want to spread the ball around. And if you can have multiple tight ends that give you the ability to attack the middle of the field, has historically been a very important trait for any West Coast offense because it thrives primarily in short to intermediate concepts. Usually passing concepts that will attack half field, but with a good quarterback can attack the entire field. And just going through, there are other great tight ends who don't have like super impressive stats, but are still good tight ends. David Njoku is a good tight end. I mean, he's with Cleveland, and I really feel like if David Njoku was with another team, he'd probably have some better number. Dallas Schultz over there in Dallas. I don't give Dallas a lot of credit, but Dalton Schultz, not Dallas Schultz. Dalton Schultz. You know, that's a guy that's capable of getting 5 to 7 TDs, which as a tight end, I'm okay as long as you get them TDs. You have Tyler Conklin over there with the Jets, who is solid but not amazing. You have Gerald Everett with the Chargers. Who is another tight end? Dawson Knox. That's a Pro Bowler. Dawson Knox had 517 yards as a Pro Bowler, but 6 TDs. So the point I'm making is if you want this position to be successful, what you're really looking for is not one all-dominant tight end, which is fantastic if you can find it. You know, Travis Kelce's exist, but they're hard to get. You know, the Rob Gronkowski's exist, but they're hard to get. If you can get a group positionally to get 1,000 yards and 10 TDs, you're talking about a very elite tight end room. Because if you look around the league, you don't have tight end rooms combining for that. You have a position that honestly has a little bit of neglect. And there's a recent chart put out, a good study done going into player contracts that talked about how running back had gone from being like the 4th highest paid contract 15 years ago to like the 2nd lowest. It's only above center right now that was just offenses. So it would have been the 4th highest and then 10th lowest. Historically, that is a wild shift, but tight end is still in that low-paying bracket. And you go and look at the Travis Kelce team. Obviously, Kelce's going to dominate, but Noah Gray is their other tight end. He had like 250 yards and 1 TD. Now, when you got that one stud, you can make an argument, okay, you don't need 2, but cool. Okay, let's take a look at another team. How about where Tyler Higbee is with the Rams? Now, I'm not saying that Higbee's a great player. That's not the argument I'm about to make, but let's talk tight ends. He got 600 yards, 3 TDs. Who's the other tight end on that team? I went and looked it up because I didn't expect chat to know. Bryson Hopkins, who had 7 catches and 100 yards, no touchdowns. So we know Juwan Johnson is a proven contributor on offense. He's a proven flex tight end. Now, is he a proven elite tight end? No. Would love him to become that. But he's a proven flex tight end. And then that brings us to Foster Moreau, who is a proven tight end. Now, he's not like a mind-bogglingly great tight end, but he's a proven inline tight end who's a good receiver, decent pass blocker, not very good run blocker, if you remember our film study. You have 2 NFL proven commodities at a position. And if I'm New Orleans, yes, I want my receiver room to be great. Yes, I want my running back room, which I've loaded up with talent, to be great. But under the radar, you currently have a positional group in the tight end room that has proven commodities, and that is not something you see very often. Again, I'm not trying to hype either of these guys up that they're becoming all pros and that our tight end room is going to be the reason the New Orleans Saints win the Super Bowl, even though Cameron Jordan has said we're going to the Super Bowl. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Who knows? I think some people got an early copy of Madden, but maybe I'm being too much of a pessimist. I do, however, see a lot of potential for success in the tight end room here from New Orleans. Remember, Juwan Johnson last year, 508 yards and 7 TDs. Foster Moreau, 420 yards and 2 TDs. Foster Moreau over the past 2 years has averaged 400 yards a season and 3 TDs. Juwan Johnson, who's ascending over the past 2 years, but just to keep it fair, over the past 2 years is averaging around 350 yards and 5 to 6 TDs a year. These are two guys who can come in and have shown that they can contribute to an offense in a way that you don't see around the league for other teams. Again, that isn't to say that other teams have just got it bad, but I don't think they have it as good. The real difference here for New Orleans is that there's not that breakaway elite guy unless Juwan Johnson becomes that guy. Now, I do love Foster Moreau, one, because he's a hometown boy, right? We love to root for the hometown guys, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But Juwan Johnson is 26, but not really old, and Foster Moreau is 26 and not really old. Juwan Johnson will turn 27 in the middle of the season. So I think that if these guys can just be good at their position, this really elevates your offense to have the potential anyway to provide an attack that you don't see around the NFL at all right now. Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson both running the mesh concept from a 12 personnel, so 2 tight ends on the line of scrimmage or just 2 tight ends on the field, opposite sides. That is something that most teams can't do effectively in a passing concept. How about let's go and do 4 verts with 2 tight ends? Very few teams can run 4 verts with 2 tight ends. Almost I would actually say no team can really run that and feel like they could be consistently successful on the inside, with the exception of having like Travis Kelce there, and you're just going to go for Kelce. You're not actually going to go for Kelce's backup. But New Orleans could have Juwan Johnson lining up as a flex tight end on one side, kind of that slot position, and then have Foster Moreau on the other side, and actually have 2 legitimate receiving seam threats at tight end. That is a rare opportunity, which Pete Carmichael, you better be taking some damn notes. Right now, listen, 12 personnel could be the area that New Orleans has the most success in personnel grouping-wise, where coming into this year, many people are more thinking like 11 personnel because they expected to overload with the wide receivers. And I'm not trying to take away from Rashid Shaheed's ability to grow, because I do hope that he becomes a better player than we even saw last year. I think he is certainly catching the eyes of a lot of people outside of New Orleans, which is good for him and hopefully good for us. And I'm not trying to dismiss Michael Thomas, but you have one proven wide receiver. And Dale, you're right, because I haven't even brought up my next point. Dale, don't get ahead of me, sir. Don't get ahead of me. Don't get ahead of me, Dale. Guess I should have prefaced it, but I've been saving that one in my back pocket. And for those who are listening, don't worry. If you're screaming for a name for the past 10 minutes, this is all planned. This is all scripted. So chill out. But when I look at this team, I'm not trying to discount what they can be, but in terms of proven commodities, you don't have many proven commodities. Chris Olave is your only proven commodity. At this point, Michael Thomas is no longer a proven commodity, but you definitely are hopeful. Rashid Shaheed is not a proven commodity. Rashid Shaheed is a proven rotational / impact / spot player, but he's not proven as an every down slot guy. None of this is me saying that I don't believe in Rashid Shaheed, by the way. We're simply talking in proven quantities in the NFL. You have 2 proven quantities at tight end in the NFL today, right now, on your roster, who are ready to go for the season starts. And to address Dale's point, because I've spent this entire time talking about 2 individuals while not talking about the elephant in the room, so to speak, or in this case, the Mormon in the room, Taysom Hill. New Orleans is also unique in that they are one of the only teams in the NFL that has a legitimate X factor. And I actually ran a poll the other day based on the discussion that we had actually on this podcast Tuesday. Who's the better all-time New Orleans Saint X factor? And Taysom Hill got a significant portion of votes. Now, he did lose to Darren Sproles in the poll, but I don't think that, again, is a negative knock on Taysom Hill as much as to speak of how great Darren Sproles is. But Taysom Hill actually came in second in a poll that in the middle of the summer, y'all had 400 different people vote in, and he got over 26% of the vote. So it's very clear that people believe in Taysom Hill, and he's proven what he can do on the field. And we've been seeing reports throughout training camp, well, mini camp and OTAs, that he's focusing more on a receiver as a receiver this year. Now, I don't believe that's going to take away, personally, I don't believe they're going to take away what he can do as a quarterback. I think you're still going to have those plays. I think they're still going to utilize him, and they'd be really stupid not to. In fact, we all called out, for those that remember we were calling out Pete Carmichael last year for just completely forgetting who Taysom Hill was? We don't want to do that either. But when it comes to lining up my roster, We got a 12 personnel right now that can really be insanely good with 2 tight ends. And then you have the Taysom Hill X factor that really ramps up the things that you can do. Whether you use Taysom Hill as an H-back, which, by the way, H-back is a form and alignment of tight end. Whether you use Taysom Hill as a flex receiver, who's essentially a slot receiver. Whether you use Taysom Hill in the pistol and let him have an option to run or hand it off. Whether you use Taysom Hill as an actual quarterback and run the Yankee concept. Just shout out TJ for his favorite t-shirt. No matter what you do, you have an X factor in the same room as 2 proven commodities. So all of this, I've been just really harping on the past 20 minutes. I want to really reinforce that I believe that New Orleans not only can be ahead of the curve stylistically, what the rest of the NFL is getting to, but I also believe that they have a unique position where while they don't have a singular star player, like they don't have that guy who's just better than no matter who he's lining up across, he's better than them. They do have a room that is arguably the best, most established room in the NFL. People forget. Go back to 2019. Taysom Hill had over 200 receiving yards. Taysom Hill, as a receiver, has shown that he can contribute. Now, is Taysom Hill an amazing receiver? No, I'm not arguing that he is. But Taysom Hill is an amazing football player. And that's all that matters at the end of the day. Let's get one thing very, very clear, y'all. Taysom Hill is a football player. I've said before, Taysom Hill is not a good quarterback. And I still believe that as an NFL starting quarterback goes. I still think he'd be a backup quarterback almost anywhere in the league. Taysom Hill is not a good running back. He has horrible ball carrier vision if you wanted to give him the ball 25 times. But what Taysom Hill is an elite football player. You could put Taysom Hill at almost any position, skill position, or even quarterback, and have some level of success, and that is unheard of. Those guys just don't really exist in the NFL. The jack of all trades, master of none is used as a negative so often, but with Taysom Hill, it truly is a positive. And sure, he may not be the guy 17 games pure starting quarterback that wins the football game. He may not be the guy that you want running the ball 25 times out of an I form or a single back or a pistol or handing it off in a H-back draw in the shotgun. He may not be the guy that you want running your deep in route, cutting through middle of the field and taking on a high point ball against the safety 10, 15 times a game. What you do have is if he did all those things 3 different times a game, it's insane. So I talked about Taysom Hill a lot, or I do talk about Taysom Hill a lot. And one thing that I brought up about a month ago, because this became a real big debate on Twitter, is people forget that Taysom Hill has put out, and this is a big stat, over 40 touchdowns over the past 5 years. Think about that, y'all. Over the past 5 years, Taysom Hill has 40 touchdowns. Now, he's gotten it in a variety of ways. He's got some rushing touchdowns. We remember those. 7 of them last year. Most he's ever had. Well, actually, I think he had more in 2020, but that might have been 8. He's got passing touchdowns, and he has receiving touchdowns, which he had 2 of those last year as well. Taysom Hill gets you into the end zone. That's one thing that just makes him so good. And Jazz, of course I would do that, 100%. Jazz, I would 100. Jazz send a super chat, which, by the way, thank you for supporting my family. Would you consider answering questions through PayPal since usually takes a cut? 100%. If you send a note with your PayPal, I will definitely read it on stream and answer your question. I appreciate you supporting no matter how you support. As far as Taysom goes, he scores touchdowns. Let me go back a little bit. Remember I just talked about Travis Kelce? How many touchdowns do y'all think Travis Kelce has over the past 5 years? And no, I'm not making the argument that Taysom Hill is better than Travis Kelce. To use one example, Higbee, who I did talk about, Higbee, in 7 years with LA, has 20 total touchdowns. 20. Kelce, who is arguably, I don't even think arguably, he's the best tight end in the NFL right now, right? Over the past 5 years, though, he's got 47. Now, again, I am not here to argue. Oh, I'm sorry, he's got 49. I forgot to include his rushing. I am not here to argue that Travis Kelce and Taysom Hill are on the same wavelength, like they're equal. But what you do have, and I'm really, really hitting on this point, proven commodities. Again, Taysom Hill is not Kelce, nor could he do what Kelce does full time. But the point is, Foster Moreau is a proven receiving tight end. Foster Moreau is a proven playmaker. Juwan Johnson is a proven playmaker tight end. Can receive, definitely improved as a blocker last year. Taysom Hill is a proven X factor. You have 3 guys in your tight end room, 2 who are quote unquote real tight ends, and 1 who is, damn it, you just want him on the field because he's going to do something crazy with the ball. He might throw for a touchdown. He might run for it. He might catch one. Hell, he might block a punt that turns into one. And I struggle to name another team in the entire NFL that has a room like New Orleans does. And normally I would really want to just like, hey, man, they got to build on that running back room. Hey, man, they really got to build on that wide receiver room. But I look at the group as a whole, and I think one thing that you notice around most teams in the league defensively is they're smaller, right? It's no coincidence that New Orleans defense is a team that runs 70, 80% nickel, and guess what? So is a lot of the rest of the league. Why? Because spreading the ball out, getting it to wide receivers, and focusing on quick shiftiness has been kind of the focus of the league offensively for a decade or more. And yet, trying to shift that back a little bit. Look at these bigger running backs coming in. Look at these bigger wide receivers becoming popular again. Well, defenses have to adjust to that, but have they all done it yet? They haven't. Hell, New Orleans hasn't done it yet. Tight ends, FYI, are bigger than wide receivers. Sometimes just as fast. Juwan Johnson is 6'4", 230. Foster Moreau, he's 6'4", 250. Taysom Hill, he's 7 foot 390. No, he's 6'2", 225. But you get the point. What you have in these 3 guys, now that I've brought all of them in here, and I wanted to have the Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau segment separate because they play a traditional tight end role where you would have both of those starting all snaps at any given time, right? So I'm not trying to dump on Taysom. It's just that I see Taysom as a positionless player. I see him as a true X factor. And to me, X factor is a position, not what you do. And I actually got asked this when we ran the poll on Twitter, like, well, what are your qualifications? How come Michael Thomas isn't that? You know, because of clutch. And because Taysom Hill cannot do one particular position at an elite level, but he can play several positions and move around and be utilized as a Swiss Army knife, just to use a cliche. That's what makes you a unique X factor. Darren Sproles was the same way, by the way. Darren Sproles was not an every down dominant running back. He was a scat back who could also slide in the slot if needed, receive. He was a great special teamer. And if you caught the defense with a 5-man box because you were in shotgun, he could kill you as a runner. But he wasn't lining up an eye for him going against 8-man boxes and moving the ball 3 or 4 yards. It wasn't his case. He was an X factor. You know, there's a reason he wasn't the starting running back. He was still good and he could dominate in many different ways. So that's how I see Taysom. Taysom is a unique talent. He's a unique football player who is operating in the tight end room, but also kind of in the wide receiver room, kind of in the running back room, and kind of in the quarterback room. Joe says, with your experience scouting, does Taysom show that he can actually run good routes? So good is relative, right? You know, when you look at what he's done in New Orleans route running wise, he's not terrible. And I don't say that with like a negative connotation. I mean, if you compare him to Michael Thomas, it's not even close. Like, Michael Thomas is a very amazing route runner when he was healthy. Taysom Hill is not. But Taysom Hill is functional, right? Again, this goes back to saying that Taysom Hill is great at nothing but good at just about everything he puts his mind to and puts his body to. Taysom Hill, if you put your best defender on him, he's not open. He's not. Sorry, not to burst anybody's bubbles, but it's truly how it is. Like, when you spy him with your best defender, you take him out. That doesn't mean he can't contribute in some way. But he's not an elite route runner. He's not an elite runner. He's not an elite quarterback. But you're not asking him to. That's kind of the premise of this whole conversation, because you can't devote all your attention to Taysom Hill if you've got Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, if he's even 80% of what he was before. But more importantly, Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau, because you have to respect what they are as tight ends. Last year, no offense, you didn't have to respect what the Saints were at tight end, because as a group, they were lacking. And here's why they were lacking. And it's going to sound like I'm throwing shade at Juwan, but I'm not, but context is important. Last year was Juwan Johnson's first year of showing true development into a pure starting tight end. Why do I say that? For one, he was not the starter your first 2 years, right? He has been in this development process for 3 years now with New Orleans. He started in 2020, picked up in 2021, and then blew up in 2022. But just because he got there last year doesn't mean he was perfect. There's a lot of things about Juwan Johnson's game that had to get better. So I'm not trying to dog him. I'm simply saying there are things that last year, just because he was there, doesn't mean he was in the form that he should be this year. If we assume that he continues to get better based on growth and the arc that he has set and the fact that he is not too old, he's not aged himself out, he's not injured himself out, he is still climbing and ascending. Last year was not a great room. You had Trautman, who never lived up to what you wanted him to be. That's just fact, not trying to be a joke. You had Jesse James for like a brief snippet, and meh. Well, hell, you got Jesse James now for a brief snippet, but who was backup to the backup to the backup? I'm blanking. Hold on. Nick Vannett. That's who I'm thinking of. You had Nick Vannett, who was brought in basically like a blocker. Then you had Taysom. So you had a developing Juwan Johnson, the former wide receiver turned tight end. You had the never developed into what we wanted him to be Adam Trautman, and then Taysom Hill. And this is the difference that one, Juwan Johnson's growth, and two, bringing in an established tight end can do. Foster Moreau shores that up a little bit. You do have to respect him as a receiver. And Juwan Johnson, we assume, continues to grow and is better now than he was last year. And last year he showed that he was starting capable, but he wasn't that elite level guy. But he was definitely capable of being a very good player and probably was going to ascend to another level next year. That should be this year. Hopefully, we'll see if we're right. So when I look at this year's potential, as weird as it might sound, I'm really excited about the potential of the tight ends. And this is my 30-minute case for why New Orleans should not only run more 12 personnel, but why the Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau combo is secretly one of the most underrated and not thought about, just because of how the NFL is, duos in the league, and how it can really pop off for New Orleans, especially with a pretty premier X factor right behind him or behind them. Words, they're hard. Who needs them? Anyway, chat, what do y'all think as you go through this? And Tony says, did Juwan Johnson get a 2-year contract? Johnson is operating him and pulled up exactly for you. I use Spot Rack for mine. Doesn't matter if you go to Over the Cap or Spot Rack. His contract is 2 years, and it does have the 3-year Mickey Loomis typical roll-off, doesn't actually matter, phantom years on the end of it. But he does have a 2-year contract for this year and next year. His cap hit this year is $2 million. Next year, it's $7 million. And then after that, it's just a whole bunch of dead wash that I'm curious to see how they do a contract after these 2 years, because he'll be 29 when he's up for another contract. And I think he is hopefully doesn't get hurt. I'm hoping that he's healthy. But if he isn't hurt, then hopefully you get another at least good 2-3 years out of him before he is done. We'll wait and see. We'll wait and see. Time will really only tell for that, and I'm really not trying to hype him up too much, but I really think that he can be a pretty impact player. That's my hope. That's my hope. Can Abram become our third linebacker? I know he's a safety, but he's a better player when close to the line of scrimmage. So what you're really asking, Joseph, is can he be a strong safety that is used in more traditional strong safety roles versus being a 2-deep safety, which it still utilizes a strong safety, but more of a hybrid guy who can cover deep, cover the quarter, and really come down to the box and lay the wood. Very similar to what Von Bell did when he was here. And Von Bell did a lot of that same stuff in Cincy as well. I don't think Abram is a starter. I'm interested to see how he looks in camp. Having gone back and watched his tape earlier the offseason when the signing happened, you can see some good things, but he does need to operate at the line of scrimmage. I think the only real role for him in that would be kind of the dime role as a dime DB to come in, cover shallow, and maybe cover the slot receiver, cover the tight end. depending on what situation it is, and then try to be a run support / maybe even blitz guy. But again, this is just based off what we saw him used in Vegas. I feel like his style is dangerous. Yes, it can be used to a really cool effect. Like you can see some cool stuff happen with it. You know, everybody loves the hard hits. Remember Raphael Bush with New Orleans. It looks great. But if he's getting killed downfield, you be very careful about how important, that thumper is. It's kind of like in hockey where you have that third line. The third line's never full of stars, but you got to debate. Do we put a young scorer on the third line who's an up-and-comer? Use an old Red Wing like Darren Helm? Or do you have the old rugged fighter who's going to lay the wood, but maybe he's a liability in defense, like McCarthy? That's kind of a philosophy that you have to adopt for yourself and for your own team. He would have to get significantly better in coverage for me to trust him. But there are situations where I'm completely okay with him coming down and guarding the box and even being used in coverage situations. But it's all about keeping the ball in front of him, right? All about keeping the ball in front of him. I see people talking about Kenny Vaccaro. That's a classic name. He did play. He started 3 years in Tennessee before finally leaving the league. I think Kenny's like 32 or 33 now. He had like a good solid 3 more years with Tennessee before his career wrapped up. So, Lame says Abram has Kenny Vaccaro upside. Vaccaro was fairly decent. Vaccaro was a good player. Vaccaro never really became elite. In fact, I'm actually curious how fans see him now, because I feel like New Orleans fans are far more strict on draft picks now than then. Because when you think about it, I bet most people who are listening live or even listening afterwards don't remember where he was drafted. Because this was in an era when New Orleans was really good. Now, it was a 2013 draft, so you had just had a couple of really weird years. You had Bounty Gate in 2012, but 2011, we love to say that we should have won the Super Bowl. 2019, you had won, and you had Kenny Vaccaro drafted 15th overall. In comparison, you look at the more recent years, how much more harshly have we judged guys? Because Kenny Vaccaro never made a Pro Bowl. Kenny Vaccaro never made any level of All-Pro. And Kenny Vaccaro didn't make it out of his rookie he made it out of his rookie contract, but didn't get a second with New Orleans. He then went to Tennessee. So he played 5 years, was a starter those 5 years, and then was gone as the 15th overall pick. Yet you'll have guys like, I don't know, Andres Pete, drafted 13th, make multiple Pro Bowls. And he's like the most hated guy on the damn team. You'll even find, Sheldon Rankins, he couldn't stay healthy, never lived up to the hype, washed. Then you'll find more names that come up. And I think a lot of it, like Cesar Ruiz, immediately dump him, trash. Thankfully, his third year he picked up, and hopefully that continues. He was picked 24th. And then we got to hope Peyton Turner turns into something. And then Trevor Penning is sitting there, 19th pick and not even started yet. So I think that there is an era where we were, as a fan base, more willing to allow guys to kind of work through their growing pains and their troubles. I think Kenny Vaccaro is a good example of that, just thinking back historically. But, for a 15th overall pick, he didn't live up to the 15th pick. He's a solid player, but he never lived up to the 15th overall pick. So, but decent. Again, I'm not dumping on him. You think about it like that, you definitely want better than a guy who simply plays out his rookie contract and then goes to another team and never became a All-Pro / Pro Bowler. I mean, when you draft a guy in the first round, you're hoping he becomes a Pro Bowler / All-Pro / MVP / Super Bowl winner. So, his play style was conducive to getting hurt. I will say this. He has some memorable plays that I'll always remember, like his rookie year where he got that tipped interception. I think it was the only interception he got that season. It was his first career interception as a rookie. It was in the end zone, into the game to beat Atlanta. Pretty sure that's when it came. And just a great game. And really kind of set the tone for maybe why we fell in love with him. But I'm trying to think, was it that first? Yeah, no. Was it Atlanta or Arizona? Hmm. Anyway, I need to be thinking on the pod. But great game out of the way. And yeah, that's really kind of all there is to that one. I was just going through memory lane in my head, thinking about it. And what a great game. And a good impression that he said. But anyway, real quick, I'm going to check for those curious about the NBA draft, for those who are listening to the pod. Pels are still at 14th. Obviously, they did not get a top 3 pick. You got Brandon Miller went second to the Hornets. You got Scoot Henderson went to the Blazers. Shout out to him. You got Amen Thompson and then Azura Thompson, who went to the Rockets and the Pistons, respectively. Anthony Black goes to the Orlando Magic. Bilal Kubali? Well, he went to the Indiana Pacers. Wizards picked up Jarris Walker. Utah picked up Taylor Hendricks. They better give us the Jazz back one day. And then Case and Wallace went to Dallas. So Pels will pick in the lottery here in a couple picks. And I don't know enough about the NBA draft to have an opinion about anything. I truly don't. Sorry, y'all. I'm not trying to be like just super stupid and ignorant, but I have no clue. So I will have to look at that afterwards and maybe give a reaction. I think Abrams will make the team. So Antonio, right now, I would say no. That doesn't mean I'm right. It just means like when I look at the roster right now, from what I see, I wouldn't put him on my team. But that's just me going from the how many safeties am I keeping? If I keep 5 safeties, he's not my number 5 safety. But that doesn't mean he won't be. In fact, New Orleans has tended to favor veterans over young guys a lot of times on defense, and then try to stash young guys on the practice squad. Now, that also was because historically the old practice squad rules didn't allow you to keep veterans, and now they do. So, who knows what the strategy is now. But I think Honey Badger may. I think that the rookie Jordan Howden's going to make it, and JT Gray are all locks. And then that just leaves guys like Smoke Monday and Abrams there on the final line. And then you've also got all the corners that you got to find a spot for, like a Debo and Taylor are kind of givens. And then you've got Lattimore, but is Lonnie Johnson a given? Is Bradley Roby a given? Is Troy Pride Jr. a given? Who's the given? No, this is Bradley Roby. Is Isaac Yiadom? Who's going to make it in terms of the DB room? There's a lot going on in the DB room. There's a lot going on in the DB room. So I wouldn't have him as a starter, but I really don't know. And until we see guys in camp and preseason, it's really hard to say because some of the vets that we're talking about could regress. That's one thing that we've always got to consider is that vets can regress. And we don't like to talk about that because we want our guys to be getting better. But truthfully, they don't always get better. That's just the sad fact of it. Waller Moreau leading the Raiders tight end group 2019 to 2020, averaged 1,400 yards, 160 targets, 120 receptions, 12 TDs. Carr will play to his strengths. I agree with you. And I think that, again, it's another reason to hit 12 personnel. But I wanted to hit the 12 personnel argument purely from a New Orleans tight end room angle. But if we go into the Derek Carr and we kind of like go deeper into this conversation, and you're 100% right. I mean, I think that New Orleans can really utilize, and again, this is also goes back to what I said about just West Coast offenses. Tight ends historically have always been very important, very key contributors to those offenses. Always have been. And there are teams who don't use them at all. That's just sad truth. There are teams who don't use them at all. But I think that you will get that in New Orleans, and we'll see how it goes. Even less chance for those Michael Thomas incentives, by the way. Even less chance for those Michael Thomas incentives if you got the tight end room popping off. I've been passing to him. Not that I don't think Michael Thomas is going to get passes. I'm just saying that opportunities may not be as plentiful as for other guys and other concepts. This is all also assuming that P. Carmichael gets his head out of his posterior, where it seems like it was firmly lodged for a good portion of last year. We'll have to wait and see. But y'all, we're going to wrap up the pod. We're about 50 minutes in. We're going to wrap up We'll be back. I am also thinking about doing some quick pods. So if y'all haven't already subscribed on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, think about doing just some quick solo shots for y'all, especially with things like the Pelicans news that pops up, that because there's a little bit of a break, like 3-4 days before we get to the podcast again. I just want to talk to y'all more. So if you haven't joined the Discord, appreciate y'all being here for the show. I had a great time as always. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of a deep analytical dive into the tight end room and the potential of why it can be great without even talking about the quarterback situation. I think y'all are amazing. Who dat? God bless. I will catch you on the next show, which is just about all the time, feels like. Deuces. That's me. Catch you on the next one. I'm outie.